Ooh, scary Halloween week. Nah, it's not scary at all. What we have going on this week, though, is a pretty interesting energy because we get started coming right off of the Scorpio new moon. A Scorpio new moon, new moons are like kind of like wake up and it takes a few days to get going. You've heard me say this before. It takes a few days to get going. It's like waking up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, sort of sort yourself out. Not this time with the new moon opposing Uranus. It's more like getting woken up at 5 a.m. by a phone call or something like that, where you get startled out of bed and you get, whoa, what's happening here? It's that kind of energy as we begin the week. Some surprises likely in almost any area of life. I would say that there's a little bit of tension, extra tension around the areas of finance and romance. But I wouldn't say that that was by any stretch of the imagination the only thing. Scorpio tends to have to do with security. So if we're having security issues, and Uranus and Taurus can certainly shake up our sense of security, it could go into any area of life. There are some particular vulnerabilities. It depends for everybody. It depends what you have at early degrees of fixed signs. It depends if you're the Scorpio or Taurus. It depends upon a lot of things. But it could be any area of life. The good news is, though, after we get this little shock on Sunday, Monday, the next thing that happens is that the moon goes to Scorpio, making, generally speaking, easy aspects that help us to sort of, settle down and get things back in the box, deal with the changes that are coming up. I would say that probably most of that is happening on a sort of emotional level. There's a little bit of practical potential there. There's a lot of opportunities for beginning to develop things. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the moon goes into Sagittarius, and at midweek, we have definitely some lighter energy than we have at the beginning of the week. It feels better to sort of clear things out a little bit. On the other hand, Venus at this point in time is going through the very end of Scorpio, and so a little bit of extra scorpionic intensity is there. Still, Venus will, on Friday, get out of the sign of Scorpio and go into Sagittarius, which should lighten things up in the areas of, just generally socializing, and certainly for personal relationships, but also for business stuff and all of that. It's just sort of lighten the air a little bit. There's less protectiveness when Venus gets out of Scorpio. But of course, during that last period of time, this week, we have Venus at the end of Scorpio, where things might get a little bit more intense. Now, the big event this week is Mercury station to retrograde on Halloween, October 31st. Talk about having some tricks along with your treats. Mercury retrograding in a water sign tends to be a little bit more problematic than in other signs. Things go wrong in a sort of awkward kind of way. Watch out for things that intersect water or liquids and electricity, things like car batteries and slow cookers and things like that, microwave ovens even. Not that anything terrible is going to happen, but they go on the fritz, things like that. That's a consideration. A lot of folks are saying things like, hey, should I do this before Mercury goes retrograde? Should I rush out and buy this car? Should I sign this contract? Should we close this deal before Mercury goes retrograde on the 31st? It's too late. We're so close to the station right now that we're sort of already sucked into the vortex of Mercury retrograde. If you got to do something, go ahead and do it, and then deal with the cleanup later. You got to really take care of stuff that you don't want any problems with a couple of weeks before the actual retrograde station. Certainly a couple of days beforehand, you're in the midst of it. Things will usually work out sometime during or perhaps after the retrograde. Sorry, but that's about the way things usually work. If you get jammed up, and not everybody will be jammed up. In fact, sometimes trying to avoid the retrograde is what actually causes you the problems in the first place. Anyways, things usually iron themselves out at some point, so it's not a complete disaster, and it only affects mercurial things: transportation, communication, contracts, business deals, things like that. It only really affects those things. So, it doesn't really affect your emotional life, your personal life, your romantic life. It doesn't really affect finances. Although, if you're doing any transactions, you want to check a couple of times to make sure that you get things right. It's only mercurial stuff. It's not going to affect your creativity. It's not going to, I mean, unless your creativity is writing, but it's not really going to affect a lot of other things. So, you know, it's a Mercury retrograde. We're dealing with Scorpio season. There's enough stuff going on. On Thursday, not only does Mercury station to go retrograde, but the moon is void, of course, for most of the day. Enjoy Halloween. Go out trick-or-treating. You know, watch the kids come and get candy or whatever that is. Go to a party. You know, get a nice costume. Don't try to do a lot of stuff on Thursday. Friday, however, moon goes into Capricorn, and we have a very different energy. This is really trying to ground us. It's a shame that Mercury is retrograde in a way, because Friday is still going to be right at the vortex, right at the peak of Mercury retrograde. You know, it's right at the stations that you get the most dramatic examples. So let's say from Wednesday through Friday, this is where you see things like, you know, airport baggage systems collapsing, the famous time that the drawbridge on the Belt Parkway in New York got stuck in the up position, things like that. You know, the really dramatic stuff happens around the Mercury stations. During the retrograde, you get other stuff too, but it's a little like a sort of ongoing headache as opposed to real dramatic stuff. Anyways, Friday, Capricorn moon, very practical energy, would be very practical energy, but the retrograde is going to sort of put some of that on the fritz. Friday, Saturday, we want to get something accomplished. We want to get something done. The moon is waxing. A Mars-Pluto square is building. Now, this is an important piece of information, I would say, from Friday onwards into next week. There's a drive to get things done. There's a drive to accomplish something, although there could be some frustrations in the act of carrying things out. What you're going to want to do is focus on something. Put your energy towards it as much as possible. Try to avoid multitasking. This is a very focused kind of energy when it's working well. If you can't get things done, then you're going to have to burn off the energy in some other way, which, like sensible exercise, like don't go to the gym and, you know, burn yourself out and create problems in the other direction, but burn off some of the energy with physical exercise is a great idea. Another alternative is just to pick some project, even if it's not a work project, even if it has no practical value, but you know, you enjoy doing it, or you can do it, and, you know, put yourself into it and just like devote yourself to it. You know, if it's Saturday, maybe it's around the house someplace or something along those lines. Sunday, we have the moon goes into Aquarius. Things lighten up. Now, Venus is in Sagittarius. The moon is in Aquarius. If it wasn't for that Mars-Pluto square, it might be feeling actually pretty light. We'll be feeling lighter on Sunday. It's probably the better day of the weekend for socializing and connecting and doing stuff like that. It's the first quarter moon, a time to sort of put things into action. Sunday, and obviously we're talking about going into Monday, the 4th of November, which is a real action time. You know, that's we're coming to next week, but that's going to be a real active time. So, in summary, this week we start out a little shaken. The basic project through the week is figuring out how to deal with things, how to make it work, how to nudge rather than push things where we want them to go. Towards the weekend, we get a little bit more energy, a little bit more inclination to actually push things. Mercury retrograde is going to be a bit of a headache, probably. Hey, you know what? The asteroid Pallas Athene is very active this week, and that tends to be a real truth-telling asteroid, and meeting with both Venus and Mercury. Strong sense that this could be a time of seeing information come out, and not to restrict Pallas Athene's area of influence, but very possibly with females being the ones who are presenting this. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez tends to be quite prominent in the news when Pallas Athene is prominent in the skies, if you're looking at something like that. But of course, she's not, it's not her personal asteroid or anything. Lots of stuff going on this week. It's a busy week with a little bit of that mercurial jumble thrown in there. If it wasn't for Mercury stationing to go retrograde, I would say this would be just a great week to just zoom forward. We're not going to be able to zoom forward, but, you know, take a few curves here and there and we'll do fine. I will see you next week. Oh, and if you're in the US, you know, the clocks change on Sunday morning so that it becomes that dark time of year, like the sun starts going down. Here in New York area, the sun starts going down, like 4 o'clock or so. Ugh. Anyways, just saying. I will see you next week. Bye bye.